Hello, BookTube. Who's up for a few more random Hedgehog book recommendations? These were originally named after Christopher Russell, who used to have a BookTube channel years ago, who was dubbed our little corner BookTube's cartoon hedgehog. And once he made a video with a bunch of random book recommendations, nothing really linking them, no real reason to do it. And I don't need much more prompting than that to do it myself. So I've got a bunch of books I want to show you. Some of them you will have seen before on this channel, like this first one, which is great. I have a whole wall here in the middle room of books, books about reading, collections of reviews and essays. And this has pride of place. This is Randall Jarrell, and this is his book, Poetry and the Age. Collection of pieces of deadline prose on contemporary poets of the 20th century, so of his day in the 20th century. And there aren't many better poetry critics than Randall Jarrell. I have known two great poetry critics in my life, and he is in their company, let's just say. Even if you look at the table of contents in Poetry and the Age and you see names that don't interest you, as I do, you're still going to love these pieces. You're going to love this brilliant mind at work. Then we have something from decades ago. This is Class by Paul Fussell. This is his book about socioeconomic, especially economic class in America. And it has aged fairly well. There are parts of this that are dated. When he wrote this book, there was wealth inequality, and there were the haves and the have-nots. In America, there were poor people, there was the middle class, it was upper middle and upper middle class, and then there were the wealthy. And that picture has completely changed. Almost completely changed in America. In another 10 years, it will have completely changed. Because in another 10 years, we will have actual, not named, but actual serfdom. And we're just barely north of that right now. But the thing that's changed between now and when Fussell wrote this book is that wealth inequality has become staggering, almost comical. If it weren't tragic, it would be comical. 80% of the households in America live paycheck to paycheck. Something like 70% of all households in America cannot pull together $400 in cash without going to emergency money lenders. They do not have a safety cushion at all. The saying here, I don't know if you have a rosy idea of what America is like, maybe you don't live here and are only buying certain lines of propaganda, but the saying is that in America, if you are a normal person, which is 99% of the civilian population, you're 2 bad turns away from being homeless. And that is true. And that wasn't true when Fussell was writing this book. So I guess you could say, I haven't read it, actually, since we entered this new and more catastrophic robber baron era. The break in terms of a robber baron era in the past was always, believe it or not, the federal government. And now the federal government is the biggest robber, so everyone else is emboldened. And I wonder if rereading this now would make it a better reading experience or a worse one. But I can tell you, you will love it if you keep in mind when it was written. And also, Fussell is witty, so that helps a lot. Then we have a big biography. This is something I praised on this channel many times before. This is by Alan Eckert, and it is his book, A Sorrow in Our Heart, a life of the great Native American warrior and statesman Tecumpsa. This is a big, whopping book, and in it, Alan Eckert uses a methodology that it was frowned upon when he was doing it. It is still frowned upon. I don't know why, if it's done as conscientiously as this, where he imports the mechanisms of fiction. He is not fictionalizing anything, but he imports the mechanisms of fiction. So if he's reading an account from Fort Smith or whatever of some major talking with some Shawnee leader, and the account is saying the major said this, and then the Shawnee replied with this, and then the major said this, and then the Shawnee replied with that, he will just make it a conversation. He'll add quotation marks and have the characters talking. If the summary in the records notes the tone of voice, then he will have that. He will mention that tone of voice dramatically rather than expositionally. And so on through the book. He says himself many, many times, he has said in interviews and various written stuff that he's done, that there's nothing inaccurate in here at all. He won't say that so much as a raindrop fell on a day if he has researched and found that it didn't rain on that day in that location. And it makes for terrific reading. This is a big book, but it is an amazingly readable one. Then we can go back to something that is more conventional in the way, another biography, but something that's more conventional in the way it goes about its business, although every bit is good. This is Davisovil, who did Longitude, that so many people love, that it was such a popular book. But just recently, I think this was just last year, this author came out with The Elements of Marie Curie, which is a biography of Marie Curie that is also really good on the science, that a lot of times doesn't happen. Marie Curie's life was so strange, it was so full of odd items, and her science only added to that oddity, that oftentimes the serious scientist gets lost. But not in this author's hands, obviously. So this is, and again, we have an author who's tremendously readable, so you'll be learning a lot along the way. Then we have another great author. She has never written a book that I have not loved. This is the author is Margaret McMillan. She's a historian, and this book is her book, The War That Ended Peace. And this is her book about the beginning of World War I. And I just yesterday got another book by a different author on the beginning of World War I. Like I mentioned yesterday, the study of how World War I broke open into the world is its own cottage industry, in a way that studies of how World War II happened are not. World War I has this odd Rube Goldberg appeal as to how it started and what might have forestalled it, how it might not have started. And here you have Kaiser Wilhelm and a very young Winston Churchill there on the cover to sort of give you a little telegraph of things. Of course, the thumbnail idea of World War I is that all of these states in Europe had interlocking treaty systems that were so elaborate and had so many dead man switches that people weren't aware that all it would take is one domino falling to suddenly line up the whole world into two sides, one pitted against the other. And the domino falling was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and his wife in Sarajevo. That all of a sudden precipitated a world war. And Margaret McMillan goes into that a lot, delves into that, same as Jack Beatty does in his book. They both go into the fact that for a decade before that assassination, pretty much everybody in Europe felt that a war was coming. The standard thumbnail that World War I caught many people by surprise is not actually true. It's more interesting than that by far. And this is terrific. Margaret McMillan is so good as a historian that I recommend anything that she does. Then we have a piece of fiction, this lovely, lovely design by the New York Review of Books Classics people. This is The Sweet Dove Died by Barbara Pym. This was Barbara Pym's last novel that was published in her lifetime. She had posthumous stuff, but it's also her saddest, her wisest, and also, please take this the way I mean it, her oldest book. It's about a steely, self-controlled woman who begins to have feelings for a much younger man. But it's a book that feels like it was written by a 300-year-old person. It wasn't. And I don't mean that to suggest that it's lifeless. But it is strange. Barbara Pym wrote a bunch of bubbly, almost Woodhouseian novels, and then she left the game for a while. And when she came back, she had more serious things on her mind, more serious books to write. I find them much more satisfying, and this is the most terrifying and satisfying of them all. And the reason why I mentioned the design is because this is a new book. The New York Review of Books is publishing this book, I think, next month, with a new introduction by Susie Boyd. So that's wonderful. So for $20, you'll be able to go and buy this thing, as opposed to haunting your used bookstores for it and getting it in whatever format you happen to find. I strongly, strongly recommend this book, this novel. I strongly do. Then we have something by Eric Klinenborg. I think I've recommended this book on this channel before. I've recommended a lot of books on this channel. This is Heatwave, a social autopsy of disaster in Chicago. 1995, a heat wave struck Chicago with what we would now call feels like heat indexes of 120. 110, something like that. And the word about this impending heat wave had not really reached most of the people in the city, and it stuck around. It stayed for a long time. And at the end of this, it stayed for so long that it melted roads, it warped train tracks, it completely overwhelmed the electrical grid for the city, so that first rolling patches of people and then huge swaths of neighborhoods had no electricity, no ability to preserve food, no air conditioning, as this rampaging heat just went on for day after day after day. And when it was over, 200 people were dead of a heat wave in the United States in the 20th century, in the late 20th century. This author goes through all the social failings, the few scattered social successes, what it all means, and how much more pertinent could this be? This is going to be all of us. By the time this decade is over, this is going to be all of us almost all the time. Summer is going to have heat waves like this everywhere. The last couple of summers have had unearthly heat in Texas alone. And I mean unearthly. I mean Venusian heat in Texas alone. Heat of such intensity and such duration that even cities, American cities in the American Southwest, were not built for it. And certainly the population isn't built for it. The electrical grids aren't built for it. Only the structural, physical plant preparations for these sorts of things are at least better in the South and the Southwest. But these are going to happen in the North as well, and they aren't built for it at all. This is it's an unintentionally prophetic book, but also amazingly gripping to read. It's just a real somber subject, obviously, as Boston looks at its next heat wave coming in just a few days. Then we have, I have book one here, but it's 4 volumes in neat little gray trade paperbacks. This is Hans Delbruck. This is translated by Walter Renfro, and it's his history of war. Hans Delbruck did a history of war. And some university press, I forget who it was, came out with 4 uniform gray trade paperbacks. Volume 1 is Warfare and Antiquity. I've heard some people say about Delbruck that his books get better as they go along, that he's obviously more knowledgeable in Napoleonic era than he is in the ancient world. I have never seen that myself. I love all 4 of these volumes. I wish I had them. Once upon a time I did. They're worth revisiting. Delbruck is really good with, he wants to talk about the evolving nature of warfare, and he does do a lot of that, but he's also really good at narrating individual battles. And this is ancient Greece and Rome, so you've got a lot to narrate there. Volume 1 is a treat on its own, but boy oh boy, they don't crop up often in used bookstores. Especially all 4 of them together. They really don't. Then we have a book by Jonathan Rose. This is The Literary Churchill. And this is a book, it is a literary biography of Winston Churchill. So it's not the disaster of Gallipoli, it's not the Victorian boyhood, it's not the Edwardian adventures, it's just Churchill as a writer, which isn't a small fraction of Churchill's life. He wrote his whole life. And it's a checkered history of Churchill's life, because he did a lot of writing that was disreputable. He did a lot of writing that was really, really bad. And when he did a lot of the writing that would then become famous, there have always been active questions as to how much of it he did. How many of his famous speeches did he write himself? His histories, especially once he was in power, more or less permanently, on and off for 30 years, how much of that stuff was written by him? His gigantic history of World War II, how much of it was written by him as opposed to being rewritten by him? And I went into this thing, loaded for bears in terms of finding Churchill to be a complete fraud, even though I knew from his letters that he did possess a natural Edwardian-trained eloquence. And boy, oh boy, Rose just does such a great job of this. It's just such a great job that I ended up liking The Literary Churchill. I'm not all that wild about the political Churchill, but I ended up liking The Literary Churchill. This will be a revelation to you no matter how much you know about Winston Churchill. And then we can finish up with a book by Nigel Reeve. With a name like that, Nigel Reeve would certainly have been dubbed by Joe Spivey the cartoon hedgehog of this little corner of BookTube if we didn't already have one. And this is his book on hedgehogs. This is Nigel Reeve's book on hedgehogs. And it's delightful. It's part of a series. Yeah, the Poyser Natural History series. There are a whole bunch of books in this series, but this one it's very fact oriented. It's very natural history oriented, but it's so eloquent. It's so wonderfully put. This will teach you a lot about the biology of hedgehogs, their evolution, their natural history, their ecological distribution. It will teach you a lot of that. But it's also wonderful to read. Just amazingly enjoyable to read in a very British kind of way, a very reserved kind of way. It's totally enjoyable. So I thought we'd end with a hedgehog book as I block the bean. So there you go. Some more random hedgehog book recommendations to get you through your day. And I will wrap this up for now. We'll do more of these next time. Thank you, BookTube.